Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carolyn. I'm going to be the moderator for today's webinar. Super excited to welcome everyone to our Billing Best Practices webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a ton of great content for you guys. First and foremost, we do have some presentation disclosures here. We're not actually going to read through those. However, everyone on today's call will receive a copy of the presentation, and you're obviously welcome to go through those when you receive that presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and start by introducing our panel for today's webinar. I'd love to start by introducing Rashid, CEO and co-founder of Bridge. Rashid, would you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yep, thanks, Carolyn, and I'm excited to be here and working with our partners at RCC. My name is Rashid. I'm the CEO and co-founder, as Carolyn mentioned. We'll talk a little bit about Bridge in a moment, but my background was on the advising side with PNC Wealth Management before joining the business and technology side of things, founding Bridge in 2015. I've been working on scaling the business and supporting great advisors ever since.
Awesome. Well, we're super excited to have you and share your expertise. So thank you so much for joining. And I am also so excited to welcome Teresa, who's coming to join us from RIA Compliance Consultants. Teresa, would you tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Yes, thanks, Carolyn. I'm Teresa O'Grady. I am a senior compliance consultant with RIA Compliance Consultants, and I've been with the firm for 5 years now. I've been in the broker-dealer and investment advisor world for over 30 years, so that's a lot, a lot of years, and most of those were in compliance. So we do have a lot of experienced people here at RIA Compliance Consultants. So. And most of our clients are outside or are in other states. We are located in Omaha, Nebraska, and other countries. So if you are interested in speaking with any of us, let us know.
Great. Thanks so much, Teresa. Super excited to have you. So now that we've done introductions, we'll go ahead and move into looking at the agenda for today's call. So we did panelist intros. We'll basically provide a little bit more information about Bridge and RIA Compliance Consultants to start off with. Then we'll go into the key objectives and learning goals for today's presentation. Then we'll move into the content itself. So we'll cover some risk factors, fee calculations, invoicing, and then some generalized best practices to kind of sum things up. And then lastly, we'll discuss billing with Bridge and how advisors are taking advantage of that nowadays. So again, 2 logistical things. Today's call is being recorded. So everyone that attends will receive a recording of the presentation. So you will be able to refer back to the materials. Additionally, we do have a team member from RIA Compliance Consultants on the line as well, available to answer questions as they come up. So if you see within the Zoom tool, there is actually a Q&A little chat bubble. So if you have questions as we're going through the presentation, just go ahead and submit your questions there. And that member of the team will get back to you with an answer or with next steps on when they'll follow up. So definitely take advantage of that. So at this point, I'd love, Rashid, to turn it over to you to tell the audience a little bit more about Bridge.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. So Bridge is a financial technology company that was started to help empower advisors to deliver better financial outcomes for their clients. The way we do that is through some of the areas that we specialize in, as listed above. So we start with a really strong core data automation platform. So we source, normalize, reconcile, run performance measurement on all of your client financial data, and then that feeds our reporting and fee billing system that advisors work with. So the tools for today's discussion are really centered around the billing components of the technology. We do have other components and functionality. Been working with advisors again for coming up on 6 years now. The team has almost 2 decades now of operating experience as well. And some stats about the business. So we work with over 250 advisory firms today. Our platform has been growing really at a pretty incredible clip, especially in the last 6 months. So our platform assets have grown by over 600% year over year. Really excited to see that kind of growth and partner with more and more advisory firms. We work with firms who are solo advisors, either just getting started or running a small business on their own, all the way up to firms and multi-billions in assets under management, dozens of advisors. So we've seen the gamut and can partner with firms of variety of sizes.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that overview, Rashid. Really appreciate that. And I would love to turn it over, Teresa, to you to tell us a little bit more about RIA compliance consultants.
RIA Compliance Consultants is an investment advisor consulting firm. We have, Brian Hill is the owner, and he started the firm in 2004. So we've been around a long time, and we have been helping investment advisor firms, clients. Since then, we have different levels of service. So if you don't need a full, annual package, which we have several levels of that, you can also engage us for hourly consulting or mock investment advisor reviews. So we have a lot of different levels of service that you can view out on our website. But we're more than happy to help anyone in any capacity.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Teresa. So we're just about ready to move into the bulk of the presentation. But before we dive into that, just covering a couple key learning objectives for today. We want you to walk away from this presentation having highlighted the importance of billing compliance and new and emerging regulations that you should definitely be aware of. And we also want to showcase how you can better utilize technology to maintain billing compliance at your firm. So without further ado, Teresa, I would love to turn it over to you to start exploring some of the various risk factors that advisors should be aware of.
Yeah, I just wanted to start off first of all by saying fee billing, fee calculations, fee management is basically, it's a very, very important part of every investment advisor firm, whether you're a one-man shop or you have 50 investment advisor reps. That part of the business affects basically every department that you have. It affects, compliance and supervision and trading and operations and sales, of course. So when we go through this presentation, it's so important, especially, when we see what the regulators are seeing, when we see our clients getting audited, we are able to help them work through, some of these deficiencies that we're going to talk about today and the calculations of those, where Bridge can certainly help you in these certain areas. And so let's just talk a little bit about, some of those risk factors are, when you are, especially when you have illiquid investments or assets, are you using fair market value? Or are you using the original purchase price? Some of these things you're going to work with your qualified custodian to get these, to get these set. Fair market value as of the last business day, or are you doing a average daily balance? And is that the previous billing period? Is it the current billing period? And then calculating fees using different types of assets. There are some firms out there who will charge a different management fee on cash or a different management fee on insurance products if they're advisor share class, or equities or mutual funds. So that makes things a lot more complicated, where you would want to certainly have some type of a third party helping you. And then all of those have to be very defined in your investment advisor client agreement, as well as in your ADV Part 2A. They have to be consistent throughout.
Got it. Thanks so much, Teresa. On the next slide, could you dive into a little bit more around the frequency of billing?
Yeah, so there are different levels of frequency of billing, and a lot of it depends on the qualified custodian that you're using. We do see, as far as my clients go, we do see a lot more of the monthly fee billing as opposed to going away from the quarterly. But as and I do have clients who are moving away from the quarterly saying, Teresa, we want to start billing monthly, which is fine. We will update your ADV Part 2A item 5. But then a lot of times that doesn't get updated in the client agreement. So that's so important. Billing in advance as opposed to arrears. Sometimes, you might change that. Or if you switch qualified custodians, it's so important to know how that fee billing structure is going to be with your qualified custodian. Another thing we see is just recently I've seen where the qualified custodian is billing the client monthly, but the investment advisor firm is receiving the quarterly payment. So there are some nuances like that. So you have to be so clear in understanding of what your qualified custodian is going to, or how they're charging those fees and the frequency. The initial billing period, is it prorated or is it not prorated? And if it's, and when is that initial billing period going to be? Is the client going to be billed initially, you know, as soon as they start, if the fee is going to be in advance, or is that prorated fee going to be at the end of the next billing period? And all of that, though, you know, that has to be defined in your ADV Part 2A, and of course in your advisory agreement. We see a lot of problems with the refund. So if you are charging fees in advance, you've got to make sure that that refund takes place. And that's where you would work with your third-party provider, your qualified custodian, to make sure that refund is being sent to the client. And that refund policy that you have has to be included in your 2A, and it has to be included in your client agreement. The regulators will always say, if they know that you're charging the fee in advance, they will say, okay, what's your policy? Is the client going to get their refund within 10 business days, 30 business days? You know, what is that fee refund policy?
Got it. And then in the next portion, looking at potential incorrect fee rates.
Yeah, so this is one that we're seeing, I think, more and more of. Not necessarily the double billing of clients, though that can easily happen when you don't have a process or a third party in place. And if you allow fee exceptions, which we're seeing more and more of. I have to tell you, I came from a firm that we had approximately 50 investment advisor reps. We were doing everything manually, and we had 150 fee exceptions. And of course, the SEC did not like that, and they could not believe that we could keep track of those, and we couldn't. But giving those exceptions is, again, another reason why you need to have a policy and a process in place. If you're going to, I mean, if you're going to go, you know, and have those fee billing exceptions, it's just another reason why you need a third party service provider for that. Applied higher rate than agreement. Again, when you're changing your fee in your ADV Part 2A, then you have to make sure that any of those changes are being done in your client agreement. And you also have to state in your 2A, if you're changing your fee schedule, are your existing clients going to remain at that fee schedule, or are they going to be moved to your new fee schedule? And again, that might be an exception to your new fee policy. So there's a lot of things to consider. And just know that when you change or update, you know, your ADV Part 1, your 2A, your 2B, your U4, any of those, or your client agreement even, when you're updating those registration documents, typically you have, you know, you can't just update one, because one affects the others, because a lot of the same information is across the board in those other documents. So just keep that in mind.
Got it. And then in this next portion, looking at some issues around rebates and incorrectly just applying discounts.
Yeah, fail to aggregate household accounts. The regulators are coming back now, especially the state regulators, saying, are you householding your accounts or are you not? Because that's important, especially if you have a minimum fee or a minimum account value. If you're going to take a client on, can clients aggregate, and can they bring all their households to hit that minimum? That's very important. And then fail to lower fee when client reached a break point. What we're seeing now is when you do have a tiered fee schedule, how are you doing that break point? Are you keeping track of that manually? And that would mean every quarter or every month, depending on the frequency of your fee, are you checking that? And again, a reason to have some type of a third-party software program in place, because the regulators want to know, again, not just if the fee is getting lowered when they hit that next break point or threshold, but also, are you using a blended fee, or when the client hits that next threshold, does their whole account value get charged that next fee? So those are a couple things to consider also. And again, it has to be stated explicitly in your client agreement how that client is going to get charged.
Thanks so much for going through that, Teresa. Really appreciate that. Rashid, I'd love to turn it over to you at this point. You know, Teresa has done a great job of going through some of the common risk factors that she's seeing advisors face. Can you tell the audience a little bit about how Bridge is helping advisors kind of streamline those processes?
Yeah, absolutely. And Teresa, yeah, did such a fantastic job going through some of these risk factors. And we, of course, see the same thing on our side with mutual clients and other advisors that we work with, where they're facing scrutiny, and we're hearing about questions around valuation and frequency and rebates and things of this nature when advisors are getting examined. And I think it really highlights the value of partnering with an expert on the compliance side of things like RCC, and also having a third-party software provider, because we're not the compliance experts. We can automate and capture a lot of this complexity and a lot of this compliance management just sort of baked into the way that the system regulates this. It's really a value add to be able to work with a compliance partner that can make sure that all of the stuff that Teresa, you were talking about in terms of documenting and updating agreements and updating ADVs, that is correctly reflected inside our software and vice versa. We have a lot of advisors asking us, hey, I want to update the way I do billing, or Teresa, you mentioned, a lot of firms going from quarterly to monthly. We're seeing a push in that direction as well. And I'm sure we'll get into more of why that's happening in the best practices section. But it's just, it's so important not to do either in a silo. And when you have technology in place inside the business, you're able to streamline a lot of this stuff. And Teresa, I think you said like the firm that you mentioned with, that you were at previously with 150 different, separate fee structures, because each of them are basically, an exception to your standard fee structure. The more complexity you add, it's adding more compliance risk, because it is just another thing to keep track of. So using technology and partnering with firms like yours, Teresa, it's such a good opportunity to leverage automation, and also make sure that automation is really adhering to the compliance that you want to be setting up inside your business.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Thanks so much, Rashid. Really appreciate that. Teresa, would love to turn it back over to you to sort of just overview some other common risk areas for advisors to take note of.
Sure. There's always some, you have to disclose the conflicts, and charging a fee is considered a conflict. Clients are being debited, you're getting paid a fee. However, if it's, deduction from the account, or if it's by check, or another way. And so those, all of those disclosures have to be made in the ADV Part 2A, but you have to make sure that those inconsistencies are taken care of. Like I said, between all of your documents, between the client agreement, it's so important. And so it's very important that also when you're doing your compliance examination or your annual compliance review, that these certain issues, especially charging fees and calculating fees and fee management, are very explicitly laid out in some type of a policy. And that can be, your 2A is more of a general, here's how we're going to charge fees and the frequency, and here's some conflicts and disclosures that they have to be in there. But also in your compliance manual, you are going to maybe be more defined, or have that policy of exactly how you're going to go about. And when you're using Bridge technology, of course, that would be part of the process or the controls around the fee billing and the fee calculation. And so that specific policy is more part of your compliance manual, is where you want to put that. Fail to disclose, certain additional fees and markups. If your qualified custodian is charging additional fees, they might charge an additional custody fee for alternative investments. You have to disclose if you are receiving 12B1 fees, if you are recommending mutual funds, additional compensation on certain assets. Are you charging on cash? If you're not, then you should state in the 2A, we do not charge cash. And if you are, it should be stated. And that should be part of your policy when you're doing the fee billing and fee calculations, is if you're excluding a certain asset class or certain assets. It's very important. If you have any type of a revenue sharing arrangement with an affiliate or even a non-affiliate, if you're getting any type of other compensation other than that management fee, it needs to be disclosed, and the conflicts need to be disclosed and mitigated. How are you going to mitigate that conflict? SEC staff encourages investment advisors to assess fee practices. We certainly recommend at RIA Compliance Consultants that you do some type of a fee billing audit. And I would say, and it depends on the size of your firm. Some firms can do an annual, but I would not, I guess I would not recommend an annual, because a lot of times you will find a problem. And so I would say, try and do that quarterly or monthly if possible, you know, depending on the frequency of your fees, doing that back end fee audit to make sure that your third party is calculating properly, that your qualified custodian is calculating properly, or that you are calculating properly, and that it's following the disclosures and the policies that you have in your 2A, in your client agreement, and your compliance manual. SEC noted that many investment advisors are proactively reimbursing clients due to the inadequacies found from updated WSP with periodic testing. So I will say, you know, a lot of my clients are doing, most of my clients are doing quarterly audits right now. They do find inadequacies. They do find problems. They will find a client that didn't get a refund. But the best thing you can do, and that's why you do these back-end reviews, or that's why you do these audits, is to find those problems. So when you do get audited, whether it's the state or the SEC, you can show them, yes, we're doing what we're supposed to. Here's the supervision that we're doing. And we caught these problems and we fixed them and we're moving forward. And that's exactly what they want to see, that your policies and that your controls in place for these, you know, common risks are in place. And when you use a technology company like Bridge, it takes a lot of that burden, the manual burden, away from you. And that's, you know, priceless.
Definitely a good thing, right? For sure. So cool. Well, thanks so much for going through all those. Obviously, that's a lot of awesome information. And again, just a quick reminder, I did see a couple questions coming in through the chat. Everyone, please definitely take advantage of submitting your questions there. And just also a reminder that we'll be sending this presentation to everyone after the fact. So in the next section, Teresa, if you could go over just some thoughts around document requests and what advisors should have or have on their mind in terms of that.
Yeah, sometimes we will see an SEC do a sweep exam. We call it a sweep exam, which is not a full exam, but they possibly are looking for information in a specific area of an investment advisor firm. So we have seen the SEC do some sweep exams for calculating third-party fees. And that could be when you're using a third party for calculating fees, or when you're using a third party for management and they possibly are charging their own fees, or you're charging the full fee, you're calculating the fee and then paying them. There's so many different ways to charge that fee, especially when you're using a third party manager too. So these are just some of the items that the SEC in this case might ask for if, you know, if they were requiring you to do a sweep exam. And these would all be included also in a full exam too, not leaving out the state of registered investment advisors, but we see more of the SEC doing sweep exams than the states. Client agreements, of course, the Part 2A fee schedules, they will ask you, give us all of your fee schedules. And a lot of times, if you do have an exception to your fee schedule, you want to make sure that you have those negotiability factors in your ADV Part 2A. That's where those exceptions come in. The regulators will look for what negotiability factors are you using to give the client a discount or an exception to your fee schedule. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe, but I just had a state come back and say, you can't give discounts to family members. I won't. So that's new to me, but maybe it's a long-standing client you're giving a discount to. Maybe it's a client that's bringing in a lot of assets that you're giving a discount to. So those negotiability factors are important when you when giving some type of a discount or an exception to your fees. Wrap fee brochures. I don't know if you know, some of you might use wrap fee programs. It might be your own that you're sponsoring, and it might be a third party that's sponsoring it. again, talking about, the fee breakpoints and the householding of the fees, that's so important because we see a lot of deficiencies when our firms have, when firms have audits in that area. And they want to see, what are you showing your client? What is the client signing off on? And what are you really doing in your day-to-day processes for calculating and debiting that fee? Any disclosures regarding advisory fees is if there's anything different with your fee, or if you're getting any of that additional compensation surrounding fees, so important to make sure that that's included in your registration documents. You should be doing we're talking about initial and ongoing due diligence of third parties calculating the fees. You might be using a third party manager that is calculating and debiting a fee for you manually, and it's your responsibility to do due diligence on that third party. Review and reconciliation of third party fee calculation. Who's doing the fee calculation and doing that, again, review and reconciliation, doing that back end audit for that third party fee calculation. And if you're doing it manually, you've got to make sure you're doing some type of an audit. And that's where, again, that's where Bridge comes in, because they take that off of your plate. And because there's so much room for error when you're doing this manually. And then communication with third party calculating fees, making sure that the line of communication is opening, and ask questions about the third parties that you're using. How are they, what are their processes, and how are they calculating? And that's what you would ask of Bridge when you talk to Bridge about their software. Ask them questions about how all of these things work. It's very, very important. We see so many deficiencies in these areas, so I guess I can't stress that enough.
Got it. Thanks so much, Teresa. And then I think on this next section, if you could just go over some of like the key sort of challenge areas that you guys have been seeing, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'm not surprised when I looked at this initially is the books and records requirements. When we see, state and SEC audit deficiencies, the books and records requirements is typically number one, because even though a firm might be updating their registration documents, meaning their ADV documents and their client agreement, they a lot of times forget about the compliance manual. And a lot of times, if you're a state registered firm and SEC, but we see it more with state registered firms, they will change their books and records requirements. And are you going out and looking on your state's website to make sure that the same books and records requirements are out there? I know we're located in Omaha, Nebraska, and the state of Nebraska just updated, not recently, not just, but recently updated their books and records requirements and added on a few more. And so we are always going out to the state websites and looking to make sure that, when we draft compliance manuals, it's so important to make sure that all those books and records requirements, the list is in your manual, but also making sure, going through that manual and making sure that, okay, I've got this books and, that you have the list that you're required to have. You're not going to have everything. It depends on your, your business structure and the services that you provide. Registration, of course, 54%. I'm not surprised again, because a lot of firms don't get registered when they need to. So if you're a state registered firm, you possibly, if you hit in most states, there's a 5 client de minimis or 5 household de minimis. And once you get your 6th client, you better be registered in the state. So again, keeping track of those registration requirements for SEC, you need to make sure your notice filed in those states. There are some exceptions to those, to the de minimis. So please, contact us if you have any questions. Contracts, we've been talking about the client agreements, throughout this whole process or throughout this whole webinar. Again, making sure that contract, the client agreement, and any other contracts or marketing or advertising that you use is properly updated when making any changes to your fees, your services, your service providers, your any outside business activities, making sure that everything is consistent throughout the documents that you use. And then, of course, fees, number 4, 27% is, we do see a lot of deficiencies in that. Custody, cybersecurity, all of these are so important. But those first, really the first 5, 6 are, you know, again, that is where you want to focus on also, because when you're doing your risk assessment of your firm, you also want to make sure that you are ranking your risks. So books and records, registration, contracts, fees, custody, cybersecurity, especially, you know, all of those are, I'm not saying the others aren't important, but these are so important when ranking your risks. And those are the areas you want to make sure and focus on, so those deficiencies don't happen.
Got it. Thanks so much for summarizing that, Teresa. Again, I just think this is such a telling slide, you know, with this information showing these deficiency areas and the fact that, you know, if 65%, you know, of advisors are having a challenge in a certain area, it's definitely something to have on the radar. So thanks so much for going through that. Rashid, would love to turn it over to you to kind of just, you know, fill in a little more information on the best practices side and some kind of trends you're seeing in terms of fee calculations.
Yeah, and you know, this is really building a lot on what Teresa you've been covering in terms of where observations are coming out of from an exam situation, and these are all things that we see as well on our side. You know, the most common time when we're getting questions about the fee billing setup is when somebody's getting audited, and in fact we see. In our experience, and Teresa, I'm curious if you see similar, far more scrutiny around the fee billing setup, because it's also a really easy area for examiners to wrap their head around, and you know, there's only a handful of places that they need to go and look typically, and so we see a lot of scrutiny both at the state and at the SEC level around fee practices in the examination process, and so. You know, these are all things that Teresa, as you mentioned, you know, are areas where Bridge can really automate a lot of the maintenance. But automating the maintenance doesn't do away from making sure that you're working with an expert to have alignment around what you are maintaining in your technology, what you're disclosing, and what you're having contracted agreements around. The other area where we see misalignment really frequently that is sort of a summary point of all the things that we're seeing on the screen here is we uncover these things when advisors are trying to change the way that they're doing fee calculations. So an advisor might be working on you know, fee calculation methodology in their ADV item 5, where it's, you know, we're billing in advance, you know, and prorating for newly opened accounts, and they want to start billing in arrears and doing it on average daily balance. We'll go and look at the way that they've updated their ADV, and we find out that, you know, they may not have been quite correctly disclosing how they were doing in their ADV in the first place, or the update that they've already made may not actually totally accurately reflect what they want to be doing from a calculation standpoint. So, you know, these are all areas where, because these are the kinds of exam observations that you know, RIA compliance consultants are seeing and that Bridge is seeing, you know, it's really, we recommend so much that you take a proactive approach and you know, engage and work with your providers, both on a compliance expertise and on the technology side of things. You know, doing an annual, you know, twice annually, quarterly if you can, as Teresa said, doing a review internally really helps avoid and be proactive around these things. And it's one of those areas where the more you do it proactively, and if you're doing it once quarterly where you're doing a quick review and then documenting that, it doesn't take, you know, a week to do a review at the end of the quarter if you're doing it consistently, because you're catching those issues ahead of time.
Got it. Thanks so much, Rashid. Really appreciate your thoughts on that. Teresa, if you could kind of kick us off in this section, just going over some of the requirements around invoicing.
Sure. The SEC registered firms do not have an invoice or billing statement requirement. It's the state registered investment advisor firms, and it's the majority of states that require every investment advisor firm to send an invoice or billing statement to their client prior to or at the same time a fee is being deducted. It might be monthly, it might be quarterly. If the firm is not doing that, then a third party does it for them. And that has to be specifically stated in your ADV2A, who is doing that invoice delivery, when is it getting done? So if you're doing it prior to the fee, prior to the debiting of the fee, or at the same time. And it's also stated in the ADV Part 1, in Part 1B, Item 2, where for state registered firms, that's a section that they have to complete about, it's the custody section, and who is sending that? Are you sending something to the custodian? Is the custodian sending quarterly statements to the client? Is the client giving written authority for the fee to be deducted? So there's some questions that you have to answer as a state registered firm in that Part 1B. We see a lot of deficiencies in here, and we register a lot of investment advisor firms, and they have a new relationship, of course, with a qualified custodian. And the first thing I say is, okay, who's doing the fee invoicing? Who's doing the billing? Who is sending out that invoice? A lot of times they don't know, but those are the things you have to talk to about, with your qualified custodian. Sometimes they will give you the option, we can do it or you can do it, or sometimes it's set. And a lot of times, I think with most of my clients, the investment advisor firm is doing it on their own. And it's another compliance, responsibility that you have to do that. So, and as you get bigger, you might start with a one-man firm, but as you get bigger and bring on more reps and bring on more clients, that fee, billing, or invoice requirement gets very daunting, because again, you have to find the time to do it, and it has to be done right. So doing that manually on your own is, it has to be done correctly. And yeah, it's a big responsibility, but it has to be done, of course.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Teresa. And Rashid, could you add some of your thoughts sort of around how you see advisors tackling these requirements?
Of course, yeah, and Teresa is 100% right, of course, on this, that it's such an important component, and one that probably gets, even within billing, which I know sometimes firms might rush through, or they state something in the ADV and then they just move on to the next thing. Invoicing in particular is an area I think that doesn't get enough attention from a risk management standpoint. And it's like a lot of this where it's not, hyper complex, but there are specific requirements. States differ. My understanding, and Teresa, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is, some states might require detailed calculation methodology. Other states might just require that you disclose in that statement what the fee is and when it will be debited. So each of those states have a different invoicing requirement, and we've built our technology to be flexible to that. So you can have a ton of detail on the most sort of hyper detailed required states, and you can have it be fairly straightforward. We have firms that really actually like the invoicing transparency that it gives their clients, so much so that even when they transition into being an SEC registered firm, they may keep using the invoicing, even though it's not a requirement, just because it's a service that adds a lot of transparency for their clients, that helps build trust and confidence in the relationship. So it's one of those things where you can turn a risk into an opportunity for trust building, because so many advisors, and certainly in the broker deal world, it's much harder to gain insight into, if you're purely just at a wirehouse rep, it can be harder from a client to gain insight into the fees that are in an account. And so it really can be an area to make sure that your firm is standing out as being transparent and upfront and proactive, and build a lot of trust and confidence in your clients.
And Rashid, I just want to add also that,
Yeah.
as you're sending those out, that would be something that you would want to audit after the fact also, to make sure that, because like you said, every state is a little bit different. And I know the state of Washington has an additional piece of information that they want on that invoice. Most of them want, what's the fee? What's the time period? What are the assets that the fee is being calculated on? So that's the basic information. But yes, there are some states that require that additional information, and doing that back end audit again to making sure that that invoice is going out correctly when you're doing this manually is very important.
Yeah, so it's such an important component.
Got it. Thank you guys both so much for discussing that. In the final portion of the presentation, we're going to really kind of dive into overarching best practices that advisors should be keeping in mind as they're tackling these complex compliance processes. So if Teresa, if you could just kind of kick us off by going through some of these, that would be awesome.
Sure. Conduct and document initial and ongoing due diligence of third-party calculating fees. Again, if you have a third party, if you're using a third party, not just for fee calculation and billing, but any part of your advisory service, you have to do initial and ongoing due diligence. Annually, you should be doing due diligence on your service providers, making sure that, do we still want to do business with them? Do we need to make a switch? And having that documented is important. Conduct an internal audit of fee calculation and fee deduction for each billing period. Again, Rashid and I have talked about that throughout this webinar, about how important that is in doing that back-end testing, the back-end internal audit, making sure. That doesn't mean you have to do an audit of every client that, you know, paid a fee or every invoice that went out, but you have to do a sample. And it really is dependent on how big your firm is, how many clients you have, how many invoices are going out. So you just have to take that into consideration. Include accounts where third party calculates the fee. So if you do have a third party that's calculating a fee, it doesn't mean that your responsibility goes to the wayside at all. You still have requirements for the supervision of that third party, making sure that the calculations are being performed correctly. Individual conducting internal audit should be someone other than the individual calculating the fee. We know that's not possible with every firm. We have a lot of 1 or 2 man shops. And if it is possible, then have a separate individual doing the back-end testing on the fee audits and fee calculations. Always compare your documents. Again, I spoke earlier about making sure when you make a change in one document, a lot of times it's going to affect your other documents. And these are a lot of the client agreement must be updated. And I think that's one of the areas that I'm working with one of my clients now in one of those areas. They did a whole, you know, restructuring of their fee, but the client agreement didn't necessarily get updated. It did a little bit, but it wasn't to where it should have been with the specific information about fees. So it's so important to have. And typically you might have more specific information about your fees in the client agreement than possibly in the 2A, but that information has to be consistent throughout your documents. A fee software spreadsheet, very important to have. Instructions to the qualified custodian. How are you giving the instructions? Are you using a third party to give the instructions to the qualified custodian? Are you just sending a spreadsheet to the qualified custodian? And is someone double checking that? The account statement, making sure you have to perform due inquiry is what the rule says for at least SEC firms. Due inquiry that your clients are getting their account statement from their qualified custodian. And what does due inquiry mean? How do you know that those account statements are going out? And of course, the invoice we talked about and how important that is to be accurate and complete.
Got it. Thanks so much, Teresa. Rashid, I'd love to turn it over to you to explore a little bit the sort of audit of billing process with Bridge.
Thanks, Carolyn. In pretty much every one of these areas, in terms of the calculation methodology, in terms of the invoice creation, with the exception to the actual disclosure and ADV documentation and client agreements, a lot of this, as Teresa's been highlighting throughout, is going to be very easy to automate. And if not fully automate, then dramatically reduce the lift and the burden on the advisory firm with working with a provider like Bridge. And so, you know, some screenshots on the screen above in terms of some of the functionality that's available there. But every single time an advisory firm runs a fee billing report inside Bridge or fee billing session inside Bridge, you're going to get a wealth of information. And a lot of the firms that we work with, as they gain confidence in the system, as they use it more and more, they may not review every single component. You know, as Teresa, you mentioned, you know, it's not that you need to audit every single account every single time, but you need to be able to do a sampling. And luckily, you know, you're able to drill into that information from a very high level starting point, going deeper and deeper all the way down into hey, I want to look at my actual calculation methodology that Bridge conducted for a very specific account and their fee structure and the group it's associated with. So being able to zoom all the way out or in to do that review and have that available every single time that you run billing is really valuable. And then also it's readily available if you are being proactive and you're doing a review with your compliance team or with your compliance expert, working with a firm like RCC. All of this information is very easy to export or even add an invite to your compliance expert into the software itself, and they can go in and they can review directly. Otherwise, any of this, again, you can come in, you can look at a fee report, you can export that fee report, you can give them a sampling of it, you can look at the calculation methodology, you can download that. There's extensive documentation on the fee billing system and inside Bridge precisely for these compliance reasons that Teresa mentioned. And so it's just there's a wealth of information, and we've tried to make it really easy to be proactive about managing the compliance of your fee billing setup.
Got it. Thanks so much, Rashid. Teresa, would love to turn it back over to you to sort of just kind of give a quick overview of items to review during an internal fee audit.
Sure. There's a list out here of important items to review during your internal fee audit or fee calculation audit. Billing advance and in arrears. It's making sure that if you are billing in advance, there are some states that don't want you to say you're charging or the client is you're going to have the client set aside a retainer. They don't, so again, coming down to the wording in your 2A, if you are billing in advance, making sure you have some type of a refund policy. And I just want to say before I forget, I have a lot of clients come to me and say, well, so-and-so down the street, I looked at his 2A and it doesn't say anything about this or that. And you're telling me this is what I need. Well, yes, I am telling you because we look at the regulations. We look at, SEC and state examination deficiencies. There are a lot of things that we look at, hopefully specific to your state. And it just means that, it doesn't mean that they're getting a pass. It means that maybe they haven't been audited, or maybe they, been audited, but that wasn't, that wasn't caught. It's hard to say. And you don't know all of the inner workings of their firm either. So, when we talk about a lot of these things, I can't tell you, I can't stress enough how important they are, because this is where you're going to have the deficiencies. The billing frequency, again, monthly and quarterly, making sure specifically in item 5 of your 2A, how are you charging the fees? What's the frequency? Is a client being debited monthly and you're getting paid quarterly? Making sure that your qualified custodian, usually in your agreement with the qualified custodian, is a lot of these details, or speak with your qualified custodian contact person if you have questions. The fee rate and the same rate for all assets. Again, using those thresholds and making sure that the clients, when they drop down to a higher threshold, usually the fee is getting reduced, making sure that that is being taken care of for each client. If you don't, and you might have to give the client a refund, as with my previous firm, there were a couple refunds we didn't do, and we had to, we gave the client interest. So you don't want to get into that situation either. And then it looks badly on your firm, because what else did they forget, So you don't want to get into that again and get into that situation. Making sure that if you're going to have a tiered fee schedule, is it going to be a blended fee? Are you going to go by tier and charge that fee? Or does your client's full account value get dropped down for the lower fee? Householding accounts should be specifically stated in your 2A. Are you householding accounts for the fee? Are you not? Valuations are so important, especially when you're using or you have illiquid investment, alternative investments, and how you're going to value those. It should be the fair market value, but it's not always available. Is a third party doing those fair market values? They want to make sure a third party is doing those instead of you, instead of your firm. And again, a source of valuation on non-traded assets. Are you getting a trail on the mutual funds? I had another client, some of these just come to mind, some of these experiences that I want you to take away, because that tells you how important. I had a client about 2 years ago, They specifically stated in their 2A, we do not get the 12B1 fees because they had the affiliation with they were registered reps and affiliated with a broker dealer, and they had their own investment advisor. It specifically stated our firm will not get the 12B1 fees, but they didn't state who was. And it was going back to the qualified custodian was keeping the 12B1 fees, but it wasn't stated in the 2A. So during their SEC audit, they had to reimburse the client, those clients, $55,000 because of the wording and the disclosure in their 2A. So that is how important, these things are when we talk about trying to do a lot of these things manually, or the disclosures that are in, your registration documents, is sending the invoice required. Maybe you're a state registered firm and your state has changed the way they're doing invoicing. It is your responsibility, especially in your home state, to know what the rules and regulations are, not relying on someone else. So go out and use the website and the rules and regs that they have out there on their websites. Go read them and making sure that you understand, because it's your responsibility for that. Deducting from another account. Do you have authorization? Has the client given authorization for you to deduct, from another account? Wrap fee disclosures. If you're using a wrap fee, sometimes it's not in the client's best interest. Sometimes it is. And if you offer both, are you doing some type of a evaluation to see what's in the client's best interest in a wrap fee program or a non-wrap fee program? And then again, charging on that initial period, if they start within a month or within the middle of a quarter, how are you going to charge that initial fee? And then again, the final, if you charge in advance, making sure that that refund is done and the refund policy is in your ADV Part 2A, as well as your other documents in your compliance manual. Do you have a maximum and minimum fee? That should be stated in your 2A, also in item 5 and item 7. So these are so important to making sure that you are reviewing all of this. And there are more, but these are probably at the top of the list for doing those internal fee audits.
Awesome. Thanks so much for going through that, Teresa. Really appreciate that. Rashid, would you mind sharing some kind of additional thoughts around Bridge for Billing?
Yeah. And I mean, Teresa's just covered such a wealth of information here. And I think it really speaks to the value of working with compliance experts like RIA compliance consultants, because it's a lot to stay up on. And it's the responsibility of the firm to be up on these changes and to be up on how the regulatory environment is evolving. And again, it's an easy area, relatively speaking, for the examiners to pick on, because it's relatively black and white, right? If you told somebody you're billing in advance and you're billing on arrears, that's just wrong, and it's very easy to spot quickly. And so making sure that there's that alignment with compliance and operations and technology, so that the things that you want to achieve as a business owner from a practice management standpoint are compliant, they're documented, they're disclosed proactively, and then they're maintained inside a system that helps automate that. Super important. And again, we've designed Bridge working with hundreds of advisory firms and working with compliance experts like RCC to make sure that it's not just easy, but it's reducing the burden of some of that maintenance for you, so that you can consult proactively with a compliance expert, implement that into a technology solution like ours, and then try to automate as much of this maintenance away as possible. You're never going to be able to automate 100% of it, of course. So there's, we've looked at a few screenshots. Obviously, we're happy to connect with folks and do one-on-one demonstrations of the technology as well. I know somebody had asked earlier in the presentation, can you use our software for billing without having to use all of the software? Yes, that is possible depending on the size and the needs of the firm. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And anyone that is interested, I would always encourage them to, when you're looking at implementing a new fee billing system, be proactive with the compliance side of your business. Engage with RIA compliance consultants while you're implementing that new fee system, so that you don't have to come back and circle around later in an exam because, your understanding of the way that you were supposed to be processing fees wasn't quite correct. And if you had just, consulted with your compliance experts ahead of time, you could have proactively set that up differently in the system. And again, it's one of those things where it's hard to be an expert on everything, right? I think as as business owners and operators and executives, we want to make sure our fingerprints are on everything. I know I can be like that sometimes, but working with experts so that you can engage them proactively and reduce risk for your business, so important. And it's a relatively easy thing to do, compared to some of the other tasks and responsibility of a business owner. It's relatively easy to engage in that process early on with firms like RCC.
Got it. Thanks so much, Rashid. Really appreciate those thoughts. And that is an awesome place to sort of wrap things up. I did want to share and kind of emphasize with everyone that there is some follow-up information here on the slide. If you are interested in getting in touch with RIA compliance consultants, you're able to either call or leverage this handy link, which I will also include in the follow-up email that I sent everyone that attended. Teresa, would love to turn it back over to you if you have any sort of concluding thoughts or just anything to sort of summarize all of the awesome information we shared today.
Yeah, this is, again, as I said, this is one of the areas that is so important for investment advisor firms, and it's nothing to, to try and do it on your own. If, some firms are smaller and they can manage, but as you grow your firm, it's so important to not let this part of your business, the compliance and the supervision of the fee billing, go to the wayside. So have some type of a policy and process in place, and certainly talk to Bridge, because it makes this whole fee billing and fee calculation process so much easier.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Teresa. And Rashid, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to thank Teresa again for her time too, because I mean, you've just got such a wealth of information, and this is exactly why we like partnering with RIA compliance consultants. Is we can't be compliance experts and be technology experts at the same time. So we really value that partnership and being able to lean on your expertise. And Teresa, really appreciate you sharing some of that expertise today.
And we value that too. Also, I want to say that.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for presenting. I'm so excited we got to share this information with everyone. And just one last time, if anyone is interested in getting some more information or starting a conversation with RIA compliance consultants, please do take advantage of that link, which I will also include in a follow-up email. And if anyone would like to learn more about Bridge and the technology that we offer advisors, please visit our website, bridgeft.com, or go ahead and reach out to our sales team directly. Thank you so much for everyone that attended, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thanks.
you.